All right, so this is, it is January 20th, happy day. And this is Senate Government Operations. And we are here today. And I'm going to go through just briefly a couple ground rules that we've established here. Is that we have a number of different people that join us. We have the committee and our staff. And of course, we're the ones that do the policies. Then we have people that we've invited to come and speak to us. And then our policy is that if other people ask to be in the room with us to observe, that they're welcome to do that. They are not necessarily entitled to speak unless we ask them, but they certainly are invited to observe. And then we have people watching on YouTube, presumably. And anybody who is either watching or who is joining us just to observe, but would like to weigh in and be on the agenda the next time we take up the particular topic is welcome to call us or email us and ask us to be put on the agenda. So that's kind of where we are. And I ask people not to use the chat function, except for Gail to post things that might be referred to. For example, if Susanna is giving her report and Gail might want to post a link to that so that people can see that. But if we were in the room, in the committee room, we wouldn't be allowing conversations to be going on around the room. So I consider chat kind of those sidebar conversations. And so we don't allow them. So if anybody wants to use chat, nobody's going to look at it and nobody's going to respond. So there we are. So with that, first, I just want to say that I'm not going to comment on the inauguration we just had, except to smile and to say it was nice. And I was blown away by the young woman poet laureate. I can't remember her name, but
Amanda Gorman.
I was just blown away. But I will thank Susanna and Bohr yesterday for the training that we had yesterday. That was really good. And it was, in my opinion, it was also very helpful in terms of practical suggestions and things to remember and things to do and not do. Because sometimes I find training is so high level or philosophical that it doesn't translate into how I might apply it. So I thank you both for that. That was, I thought, very helpful. So with that, I think that what we'll do is jump right into Susanna's report. So Susanna, just identify yourself for the record so anybody out there knows who you are, and let's go.
All right. Buenas tardes, Susana Davis, Racial Equity Director for the state. Thank you for having us. We also have the members of the Racial Equity Advisory Panel on the line as well. They have submitted a concurrent report. And actually, if you don't mind, I'd like just to step back so that they can introduce themselves if they would like.
That would be perfectly fine and I will say that our committee feels almost I know this is going to sound really horrible, a motherly role toward the committee and toward your position because we were the ones that created it. So if you would like to each introduce yourself, that would be great. Thank you.
Parental.
I kind of like motherly, but anyway.
We want to include Brian. And
parental sounds so paternalistic. So I will, Stephanie?
Sure. Hi there. This is Stephanie Seguino. I am a professor of economics at University of Vermont and do a lot of research on racial disparities in policing, and am a very proud member of this advisory panel.
Thank you. Clarence? I'm going across my screen like that. Hi, Clarence. I can't hear you.
neither can any of us.
You don't seem to be muted, but I can't hear you.
How about now?
Okay.
Clarence Davis, work at the University of Vermont Foundation and a proud inaugural member of the Racial Equity Advisory Panel.
Thank you. Karen?
Hi, Karen Richards. I am the former executive director of the Human Rights Commission and also a very proud and happy member of the Racial Equity Advisory Panel.
Great. Andrea?
Good afternoon. Thank you for letting us join. My name is Andrea. I'm chair of the Racial Equity Panel and very honored to serve in that role and with my fellow panel members. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we missing somebody?
The fifth member of the panel is Judge Nancy Waples, who
Right.
unfortunately couldn't make it today because she's judging people, as is her job.
So I'm going to say that this is quite an impressive group of people, and that I know that this is a topic that what we're going to do is start the topic today. We're going to hear the report, and we will be having this conversation more than just this one time. So I want you to know that if we don't have time to get all the conversation in, please know that we will be doing it again and again and again, probably. So with that, Susanna, if you want to, this is your show now. You just figure out how you want to do it with the panel members, okay?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few slides that I'd like to show that will just summarize some of the high points of the report. I'll try to be quick, and I invite any members of the panel to jump in as needed, either to correct or add anything or to submit any additional information that appears in their own report. So I'm going to start the screen share. No, I'm not. I don't have screen share capability. But
I think Gail can make you a co-host or something like that.
Okay.
Susanna, let me know when you see it. I did give you those privileges.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to talk a little bit about the 2021 reports that were issued by the executive director and by the advisory panel. First, the statutory grounding that makes these reports necessary. This is 3 VSA section 5003 and 5002 that mandate that the panel reports annually to the committee on the extent to which the state's achieving our performance targets and the nature and quality of the director's collaboration with the cabinet. And then section 5003 dictates that the director reports to you demonstrating the state's progress in identifying and remediating systemic racial bias within state government. And the reason that I highlight these is because the report necessarily goes beyond that scope, because in order to identify and remediate systemic racial bias, we really have to understand the underlying concepts that make racial bias systemic. So you'll hear me talk probably more about current social events than you do about the nuts and bolts of governance. And that's by design. It's really so that we can understand just how pervasive racial bias is, and therefore how deeply embedded it can be in state operations. So first, I, of course, am going to start by discussing COVID-19, which is the talk of the day for the last year. Can you all see the top of my screen? Can you see the top banner that says COVID-19?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I want to make sure it's not blocked for you. So one of the things that I'm going to cover 3 topics in COVID-19. One is data reporting and collection. One is disparities in infection and death rates. And then this one, welcoming and xenophobia. And the reason that I'm covering this is because this was a major feature of the state's social landscape last spring and summer. one of the things that we saw was that the sort of out-of-state xenophobia that Vermont has already kind of been known for was really ramped up when we saw people who had out-of-state license plates or who were known to be recent new residents to the state were being harassed and sometimes assaulted just for their mere presence in the state. What you're looking at on the screen is an image of a car that I passed by. Actually, this is my neighbor's vehicle, and they've written into the dust of the rear windshield, "We live in VT, waiting on new plates." And this image was really jarring for me because this was a couple who had come from a neighboring state, a New England state. They are actually white people in Vermont, and yet they felt so unsafe and uncertain being here that they felt the need to broadcast that they live here because they were worried about being harmed or harassed because of the heightened fear and anxiety around COVID-19 in the state. Now, aside from the social fabric that was affected by COVID-19, we also had disparities in infection and death rates between racial groups. What you're looking at now is a comparison chart that shows on the left cases per 100,000 people broken down by ethnic group in Vermont, and on the right, deaths per 100,000 people broken down by ethnic group in Vermont. What you'll find is that despite the fact that people of color in Vermont represent only 6% of the state population, we represent an outsized percent of cases of COVID-19 and also of deaths, particularly in the Asian community, overrepresented in the death rate, and the African-American community overrepresented in the infection rate. And one of the big things that was troubling for equity practitioners around the country was the frustration that people assumed that there were inherent factors about our ethnic groups that made us more vulnerable to COVID-19, without the acknowledgement that so much of that heightened vulnerability is the result of systemic bias. I'll give a couple of examples. First, we know that COVID-19, the discussion around it at the beginning was that it was an upper respiratory illness, and that therefore if you had an underlying condition related to your respiratory system, you were at heightened risk. Well, we know that people of color, particularly the Black community in America, have higher rates of things like asthma. An 8-year-old Latino child is twice as likely to die of an asthma attack than an 8-year-old white child. And we know that the neighborhood Harlem has for many years had the highest instance of asthma in the country. But what a lot of people don't know is that there's a reason for that is outside of the control of the community. For example, Harlem had the highest asthma rate in the country because that's where the city parks all of its buses at night. We know that epigenetic factors are leading to worse and worse climate disasters, which are leading to poor air quality, higher levels of ppm 2.5, which results in Latinos in the United States living more in counties that have violated clean air quality standards than in other places. So all of these factors around us together create a system that makes people more vulnerable to illnesses like COVID-19 due to the poor health outcomes that we experience as a result of being brown in the United States. So that was another big finding that was highlighted this year. A lot of people really started to see how existing structural disparities gave rise to specific COVID-19 disparities. Last, I just want to touch on data collection and reporting. In Vermont, we really struggled in the beginning of the pandemic to collect data accurately and consistently. By the spring, we were only collecting race and ethnic data at a rate of barely a quarter, 27%, despite the fact that race and ethnicity was a required part of the CDC form that was used for patient intakes for COVID-19. It was the advocacy of community groups, community advocates, and working with the health department to issue guidance to these providers that really made us increase that collection rate to over 99%. And then also backtrack to collect the data that had previously not been recorded. So of course that took an extra expenditure of staff time and resources to collect info on the back end that we could have gotten on the front end if all our providers had been consistently engaging in this best practice of collecting race and ethnicity data. And this I highlight because it really showcases how so much of what the state does, or rather it highlights how the state can make every effort to be racially equitable and to collect thorough and accurate data, but it cannot do it alone. And it requires that institutions like health facilities, et cetera, also participate in collecting the kind of data that the state can then use to measure disparities. Next, I'll just say a little bit about election 2020. It was a mess. It was a hot mess. And we saw a lot of tumult. The community, not just in Vermont, but nationally, people felt as if they had less and less in common with one another, especially on the topic of racial equity. The Racial Equity Task Force, of course, separate from the Racial Equity Advisory Panel, was created and was given 3 charges. One of those charges was to evaluate how the state can encourage more people of color to run for and serve in public office at all levels of state government, which includes boards and commissions. As part of that work, we interviewed people, legislators, candidates for office who were of color, to have them tell us about their experiences running for office or serving in office in Vermont. The experiences we heard, some of them were really, really just harrowing, discouraging, and troubling. We have heard of people being threatened with violence, harassed, and in their minds, it appeared as if there was no recourse. And I hate that I'm depressing you so much right now, but we gotta lay this groundwork.
Yeah.
Next, I'd like to move on to the census 2020. The decennial census this year was also quite a mess because of a few changes that were made this year. First, the U.S. Census Bureau introduced a measure called differential privacy. It's a little bit complicated, but effectively what it does is it scrambles the numbers. It scrambles people's identifiers to prevent nefarious actors from using census data for things like, spam advertising, et cetera. So for example, it might take data that says, well, let's just say this neighborhood in New York is 10% Latino, 11% Black, and 13% Asian. Differential privacy will say, okay, we'll make that, 19% Latino and 6% Black and, 18% Asian in order to thwart those actors who may be using data for evil, not good. The problem is that states that have small populations or towns with small populations, dropping the number of, let's say, indigenous people by just 2 people could effectively erase them entirely from that town if there were only 2 people in that town. So states like Alaska and like Vermont, who have very small populations of people of color, are really, really harmed by measures like differential privacy, because since our numbers are already so small, even minor tweaks can represent differences of hundreds of %. Additionally, the now former administration, as of about 2 hours ago, insisted that undocumented people in the U.S. not be counted in the census, and this is hugely problematic, especially for states like Vermont. We have a large undocumented population here in Vermont. They contribute not only to the social fabric of our state, but also to the economic fabric of the state. They are effectively a backbone of the dairy industry, and the dairy industry is a backbone of the state. And so by excluding undocumented people from the census count, not only are we just creating an inaccurate picture of American communities, but even worse, we are costing ourselves representation in government. We're costing ourselves dollars. That's $40,000 per person for 10 years. And we're costing ourselves a real opportunity to make sure that we're balanced in our representation and in the way that we do business. So the exclusion of undocumented people is also hugely problematic. These 2 things have been challenged by a coalition of states. That coalition of states does include Vermont. We were included in the lawsuits and actually quoted in some of the legal materials. And so we are participating in pushing back against the federal government to ensure an accurate and equitable count. Last, I just want to say that our response rate was very, very high. We reached 99.9% response rate, which actually put us in a 5-way tie for the state with the highest response rate. Part of the reason, in fact, I'd say the reason that we were able to accomplish that was because of the creation of the 2020 Vermont Complete Count Committee. That committee's sole purpose was to ensure an accurate and thorough census count in Vermont by focusing on hard to count populations. One of the populations considered hard to count is communities of color. So the existence and the really hard work of that committee made all the difference in making sure that we got as close as we could to accurately counting people in Vermont. Next, I want to talk about the movement for justice that swept and reswept the nation this past year. in 2020, a lot of things changed in 2020, but one of the things that did not change was the continued murder of people of color by the government. Somewhere between 422 and 742 people of color were murdered by police, by the government, in the United States last year. And it just caused a ripple effect of pain and indignation across the country, including in white communities, which was surprising to a lot of people. We got flooded with requests for things like trainings and talks and insight and policy review and you name it, from community members, select boards, not-for-profits, corporations in Vermont, and different agencies. And in response, one of the things that we did was to create the Action and Allyship Guide, which kind of helps break down some of the social issues and helps people identify ways to get involved. Also has a list of suggested media and just general good practices. It has been, I don't really think that flurry has really let up, honestly, in all this time. And I'm certainly not the only one who's experienced it. I know that Boryang at the HRC has also felt it. You know, folks at the NAACP have felt it. Pretty much anyone who has ever spoken about racial equity in this state has been flooded with calls for assistance. And some of those calls are really well-intentioned and sincere, and some of them are a little bit performative. And so being able to parse through that and do as much work as possible, as effectively as possible with groups that are sincere, I think is probably the art here. Another thing that happened in 2020 impacting racial equity in Vermont was that the former president, issued an executive order on combating race and sex stereotyping. You probably heard about this. This is the executive order banning gender equity trainings and racial equity trainings. That executive order claims that racial equity and gender equity trainings are racist and sexist in themselves because they, quote, are designed to divide us, and they, quote, decrease opportunities for minorities, and that they, quote, distract from the pursuit of excellence. So talking about racism distracts from the pursuit of excellence, according to that. So the order effectively barred equity trainings that they thought taught certain divisive concepts that they made up. The order also required that government contractors signed contracts that had new language in it that would bar them from conducting those trainings. And it also established a hotline so that people could submit complaints about violations of the order. In October and in October and a couple of weeks ago, we issued guidance to state partners and local partners to advise on how to proceed. It's not likely that the order is really going to have any impact on people in Vermont or any entities that are doing training in Vermont, mainly because the reputable entities who do trainings like this in Vermont don't teach the so-called divisive concepts that are outlined in the order. It also generally just applies to federal employees and their contractors. So overall, we're not concerned that this is going to really affect Vermont, but we're still monitoring it and the legal challenges that have sprung up in its wake. Just going to run through a few of the administrative things that we've been doing in the vein of identifying and mitigating systemic racial bias. The executive agencies are now required to conduct equity impact assessments with every budget and policy proposal. What that means is that any agency or department that's going to generate a proposal for budget changes or policy changes will need to complete effectively a questionnaire that asks certain questions to ensure that there are no unintended consequences for marginalized groups, or to help them flesh out how they will maximize benefit of the policy, of the proposal for all people across Vermont. EIAs are a really, really important part of policymaking. They are sound, they are evidence-based, and they're used in jurisdictions across the country. So Vermont is joining the ranks of jurisdictions that have taken that wonderful positive step. Equity liaisons, we now have a network of people in SOV agencies and departments who are serving as point people for equity-related work. So they will liaise with me, they will help their agencies maintain an equity focus in their work, and they're just an extra set of eyes and ears so that if staff feel comfortable approaching them about an equity issue, or if they're noticing certain patterns emerging in their agencies, that we can all have a centralized place where agencies can come together and say, I'm experiencing that too, or hey, this is how we handle that problem, or hey, you should try recruiting from this channel. So it offers another avenue for agencies and departments to collaborate on racial equity instead of doing things in a siloed way. And a lot of other smaller things happening. They're here listed in very vague bullet points because a lot of them I'm not really at liberty to confirm them 100% yet, but we've made changes to things like hiring guidelines. We are looking at the workforce equity in the state because we have not been meeting targets in terms of equitable hiring and retention. And we're doing work around affinity groups, which I'm hoping we are able to announce in the coming month or two. I want to talk a little bit about legislative session 2020. We did a lot of things related to racial equity, things like the Economic Stimulus Equity Fund, which was the COVID relief fund for people who were excluded from CARES Act funding due to immigration status. That was an incredibly proud moment for Vermont. We were the first state to do that officially and to provide the full payment. Other states had done something similar, but it was a reduced payment and it was kind of funneled through community groups. We also set aside money for CRF dollars for specialized training on race and equity, and CRF dollars for the creation of an equity dashboard. Those two projects are still in process. And with the extension that was granted by the federal government for CRF money spending, we are able to give ourselves more runway so that we can get it right instead of rushing it through for December. So that was another unexpected silver lining. And we were also able to allocate money for translations of COVID-19 guidance. As you all remember, there was guidance changing every week, every day, it seemed like. And making sure that Vermont's limited English proficient community had not just access to the information, but timely access to the information was absolutely critical. Policy items like criminal justice and land use and environmental justice and housing, all of this was touched on in the last session. Some of it felt more successful than other parts of it. Some of it happened in a whirlwind, and others, it seems like the work still isn't done. I do want to talk about process. Some of the observations that I had from last session were, we've got to do better about balancing timing with urgency. Many times we feel rushed by deadlines. We feel rushed by the looming end of session. We feel as if we've got to get something done now because this year we have the votes, or we've only got a month to do this. And what's really important, especially when it comes to equity work, is not just that we get it done, but that we get it done right. And oftentimes that requires that we take our time in doing so. So one of the things that you will likely hear me say multiple times this session is, please, for the love of all things on earth, if we have to, let's slow it down. Because our self-imposed deadlines should not be the dictators of the quality or the breadth or depth of our equity work. Next, we should also do more to ensure fair representation and that people have the access to be heard. I have heard anecdotally from people around the state that they are often frustrated that when they're called as witnesses to testify and they sit through an entire hearing and then at the end they come up and they're always told, oh, we don't have a lot of time. Or, sorry, can you come back? Or, hey, you know, we're asking one person to speak on behalf of an entire ethnic group, and then we'll make decisions for that ethnic group based on the one person's opinion. And so making sure that we're giving fair access to everyone to be heard is really important. And then also anchoring budgets versus anchoring need. Sometimes we take an approach and we say, well, this is how much money we have. How much equity can we buy with it? When really what we've got to do is anchor the need and say, how much equity is needed? And the answer is all of it. How much equity is needed? And now what's it going to take or what's it going to cost, right? So anchoring the need instead of anchoring the budget is really important. I just want to run down as a reminder the work groups that are related to equity. And I think, Madam Chair, you'll have to forgive me if I'm wrong, but if I remember from when I first came on, I think you also chair the Sunset Committee or the Summer Session Committee on Boards and Commissions.
Yes.
So you're probably familiar with this, but for those who may not be, this is a list that is probably not exhaustive of all of the groups that the state has created to deal with equity in some way. There are about 17 that I interact with. I formally sit on 9 of them, and 2 of them I serve as liaison per the enabling statute. These groups are a huge, huge part of the identifying and remediating systemic racial bias in state government. So my prime suggestion here is support the groups and resource them adequately. I see that a couple of minutes ago, Dr. Nasreddin Longo joined, and he's one of the people I would say, I think he chairs 2 of these at least. And the work that they've put in has been so monumental for Vermonters, and it's going to have lasting effects for us. So I strongly urge that the committee and that the legislature consider adequately resourcing and supporting all of these groups. And it looks like that's all I have for you. I want to make sure that I don't take up all of the time for our segment. So I invite any of the panel members to jump in if there's anything that I missed or misstated. And thank you all for your time.
Thanks. Does any panel member would like to weigh in right now and just give us your impressions? And I will say, before you do though, I'm going to say that given the fact that, Susanna, you've been here, I think about 1.5 years, is that right? And that in the meantime, we ended up with a pandemic, that while you were talking here and we're going through what you accomplished and what you're working on and stuff, I made a note here to myself, Energizer Bunny. But I can't imagine the energy and the commitment that it took to get this far with this little time and in these circumstances. So I just want to thank you. And with that, I'll invite any any panel member to weigh in here. What would you like to say? Just please unmute yourself and speak up. I don't hear any panel members. Oh, that's okay. I mean, Susanna gave a pretty thorough report. And if you haven't read the report, I'd suggest reading it because it fleshes out a lot of these ideas that came out in a pretty narrative fashion. So please read it. Any committee? Yes, Senator Rahm.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Susanna and committee. There's nothing I would disagree with, obviously. I just so much value your work. What I wanted to dig deeper into is that piece about language access. I was heartened to see that the Department of Health put out somewhat of a report on why they believed the disparities between Black Vermonters and white Vermonters was so high in COVID infection rates. It really sort of landed on systemic racism, was kind of the second half of the report. I think that's valuable. And at the same time, I just think it's pretty obvious to those of us who spend a lot of time in Burlington and Winooski that information was very much delayed in the pandemic. So that's really where my sense of urgency is. And also speaking to your point about not anchoring the budget, you know, when I worked to draft a language access plan in Burlington, knowing that at some point resources are finite, we had to prioritize this agency gets life-saving interpretive services first, then this one on down to what's nice to have. And so I just love to dig more deeply into, you know, the most urgent work, I think, some of the most urgent work, which is the life and death situations for new Americans.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator. You know, language access is absolutely huge, especially in Vermont, because a big portion of the limited English proficient population in Vermont is also part of the refugee community. And so we have to understand that not only are you an immigrant, but you are also someone who may be coming from a trauma background. And so not only are we providing services to you as a person who's new to Vermont, and, you know, again, we've got people waiting on new plates, even when they come from another New England state, right? So not only are you from out of state, not only are you from out of the country, not only may you or may you not speak English, but you also may be coming from a situation that requires care and trauma-informed care. So all of those things kind of swirl together, and then the pandemic, right? So all those things swirl together to create a picture that, as you aptly describe, it could be dire for folks. I do take your point about having to prioritize which sorts of translations and interpretations we can do based on the funding limitations. And I would agree with you that once we have identified the need and anchored that as a standard, then at that point we start to cull. And I would recommend things like public safety, particularly when it comes to like court interpretation, is key. Public health is really key. And education or anything related to primary and secondary schooling would probably be sort of, and this is me spitballing, but I guess I'm spitballing on YouTube. I don't mean to commit the admin to this, but services and sectors at that level of importance, I think should absolutely be prioritized in that way. And we have different contracts with different organizations around the state. AALV does a lot of work. USCRI participates a lot in translation services, but it is going to be a goal for us this year to come up with a unified translation plan across the agencies.
I'm going to add something here that may or may not be relevant, but I think it even goes beyond just translations into another language. We 2 years ago, before the session started, we had a Senate Democratic caucus to pick out our pro tem and stuff, and we had two young men who were Somalian refugees speak to us about their experiences coming here and what they experienced as a new American. And one of them had a brother who really wanted to become a law enforcement officer. And when they were he passed the physical test and everything. And when they were doing the written test, they give you a scene here, a situation, and then you pick the right response. And he knew exactly what the right response was, but because English is such a, I don't know the word to use, silly language, the nuances between those choices were so small, and English wasn't his first language. So he didn't know which of the nuanced ones was right. He could have told you in an oral presentation. So we worked with the academy around how they do that. And we just got, Tim Ash just sent to me, and I think to all of us, a note that man's brother, the man that came and talked to us, the young man that came and talked to us, it was his brother that wanted to become a law enforcement officer. But that young man himself also, it turns out, wanted to become a law enforcement officer. And he just was inducted as a trooper because they were willing to work with him. So I think it's more than just there. Even if people are English speaking and English reading, that we need to pay attention to the kind of nuances in our language that may cause people not to be able to serve at their highest level. So just throw that in. Any other questions or comments or committee or Senator Polina?
Yeah, I just want to recognize the level of patience or tenacity or frustration that you must feel every day doing the work that you do, and how blatant it is when these things about the differential privacy and the medical healthcare workers not writing down the race data. I mean, stuff like that is just so blatantly wrong. It makes it hard. It must be hard for you to just get up and get out of bed every day and do this work. And as someone who's done a lot of organizing, I appreciate the fact that you have to be resilient and find small victories to keep moving forward in a way that is really useful for everybody. But I'm wondering about, you showed that list of those equity groups. I don't know if that's the right phrase to use, but it seems like we sort of put those groups together so we can pat ourselves on the back and say we're addressing this issue or that issue. I'm wondering, maybe you said this during your presentation, but should there be some real thought about trying to take a hard look at what those groups are actually doing and somehow make them more coordinated or combined or just something so that we don't just have a list of organizations dealing with equity that aren't doing anything? I don't mean to be negative by saying they're not doing anything. We're just wondering what your take is on that.
Yes, Senator, I do think that there should be a closer look given by the legislature, by the executive, to how many groups we've created. And I have a different slide that shows a timeline of when all of those groups were created. It goes back, I think, as far as the 80s with the HRC. And then the closer you get to present day, like the last 5 years, it has just been an explosion of task forces. And so it is really critical that we keep that in mind the next time we're thinking about creating a commission or a work group or a task force, that we consider the balance between a standing committee versus a task and finish group. And that we look at the overlap. Now, I will say, and I forgot to mention it in the presentation, but we, last February, we convened all of these groups. And believe it or not, we convened them in the same room because we were only weeks away from learning that we could never do that again. And it was a gathering of members of all of those groups who came together. And we said, hey, do you all even know that these other groups exist? And for many of them, the answer was no. And then we did some very unscientific data collection to figure out where are the overlaps and the gaps between the workflows of those groups, who's required to report, who's not, who do you report to, who gets staff assistance, who doesn't, do you have funding? And what we learned was very illuminating, but it also provided an opportunity for us to build a camaraderie. The group was enthused enough that they agreed to meet quarterly from then on. And so we are sort of doing that coordination among ourselves, but we do strongly encourage you, members of the legislature, to consider how we have to bounce and pivot with each other to accommodate the seemingly ever-growing list of committees that are being created. I will also note that there are multiple people who sit on multiple of those committees.
Sure.
Which on the one hand can be a good thing because it can help to sort of unsilo and create consistency. But on the other hand, it leads to burnout and representation fatigue. And it also is a missed opportunity to engage new people in Vermont who don't have a direct line to government. So those are just some things that I would consider.
And I think task forces are necessary. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Anthony.
Let's say task forces are necessary at times. They're better than studies. It goes back to what you said about being rushed through a legislative session and you got to get things done. And so often we don't have the time to solve problems. So we appoint other people to hopefully go out and solve those problems for us on behalf of the legislators. And I think that's sort of plays into what you were saying about needing to take a longer term approach to developing legislation that really works. And I know from my point of view, every time a session starts, the first discussion we have is like, how are we going to get out of here as quickly as possible? And I think it's not a good way to make policy, to feel like you have to rush your way through it. So anyway, I appreciate your feeling about feeling rushed, and I hope we can overcome that somehow.
Susanna, I would love to see that chart that you did. If you could share that with us at some point, just all the groups and when they were created and what their timelines are, and do they dissolve after they're done with doing what they do, or do they keep on, and are they whatever you came up with? I think that would be really valuable for us to look at here, because we are the Government Operations Committee, so we should be looking at that.
I'll send that over to Gail.
Thank you. Senator Clarkson.
Thank you, Susanna, and all of the team. I'd like to go back to your report and talk about anchoring the need. And you who have been appointed to, we have seen so many pieces of legislation where you or your office have been specifically appointed to serve. So, and we helped you a tiny bit because we knew we could only help you a tiny bit. So I'd like you to actually share with us honestly what anchoring the need would actually mean for your office. What would you need in your office to actually fulfill the work and the expectations that we have set and that the administration set for you?
Thank you, Senator. To be frank, what I need most is not going to come directed to my office. The bulk of our investment in racial equity should not come to the Racial Equity Director's office. It needs to go to areas like health and housing and justice and education. And so what I really want from you is many, many dollars to other people to do this work. Now,
But-
in terms the very narrow question that you're asking me that I'm trying to wiggle out of, which is,
I know.
do I
I'm hearing that wiggle.
Okay.
this is, do I need staff and money? The short answer is yes. And we can get a lot done if you add one person, if you add 2 people, if you add 10 people. We'll make it work. We've been making it work for the last year and a half. So I say very generally, yes, added staff support will be a big help. But I am less concerned with the specifics around that and more concerned about making sure that nobody sees that as the bulk of our racial equity investment. And I also should say, I don't know if I should say, but it seems like I am saying it now. I am aware of conversations that are happening internally that will speak exactly to what you're asking. So I just beg your patience for a tiny bit longer, and I think that you'll probably get an answer to what you're looking for.
Well, and I think your answer is fair because we know you need more people to just to do your work. But what would be particularly helpful for all of us who serve in other committees of jurisdiction are with your specific suggestions, which you're beginning to roll out with the task force, specific budget and programmatic and budget suggestions that tie to dollars that we can advocate for in our committees of jurisdiction. Because if you say embed that, anchor the need, embed it in the policy areas, great. But we need your direction as to what and to how much.
Thank you. Yes,
Is that
I won't be shy.
good?
We see that.
None of us are, so we expect the same of you.
Thank you, Senator.
So, any other questions or concerns right now? What I had hoped to do was then to hear from Eitan and then can kind of continue the conversation. I'm aware that we did tell Senator Rahm that she could take from now on, we will ask you to make your interviews after committee so that we don't disrupt the flow. The rest of us don't get called for interviews, so we don't have that problem.
That's not true. You get called all the time.
I know. I just ignore them. So does that make sense to do it that way? And Eitan, are you okay with that? If we take like a 10-minute break right now and then come
Sure.
back?
Absolutely. Whatever you
Okay,
need.
great. So what I would do then is ask everybody to mute and turn off their videos, and Gail will put up a thing that says that we're on break and that we'll be back. Thank you. And I don't think that this report necessarily probably is more likely to go to judiciary,
Okay.
but we are going to, because we deal with law enforcement
Yes.
and data collection and stuff, we're going to be looking at this, and Bryn Hare is going to be working with us around this issue. So we thought that on this day, we would have you giving us the report also, and then to help us in our conversations and to flush it out a little bit. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Fine. Well, let me give you sort of the background to the report, and just to frame my remarks, the background to it, sort of the significant takeaways as I would think of them, and then kind of a defense of funding. I would like to go through it in that order. This goes back, actually, the history of this to the pandemic. The bill that became Act 148, which I believe was S 338, we were told was a shoo-in. And then after the pandemic started, we were told that nothing non-pandemic related was going to go through. I depend, since I'm not a lawmaker and I live down here in Putney, I have all these informants sort of scurrying around the State House, and that's how I get my information, because the conversation thing doesn't work real well. So suddenly, I think it was probably early July, I was informed that the S338 had indeed gone through. It was signed and was now Act 148, the Justice Reinvestment Act. And also that the RDAP, the panel that I chair, had responsibilities in regard to the new act, and specifically to Section 19. This was the section that directed the panel, with the help of the Crime Research Group, to consider data that could be used for the amelioration of racial disparities in the criminal and juvenile justice systems. We were before this point as a panel looking to amplify many of the points that we had made in our report of December 2019. There had been a feeling, certainly on the part of the Joint Judicial Committee, that a deeper dive might be useful in regard to the recommendations that we had made in that document, and we were turning our attention there. We were now being asked to reconsider data, and it really was a reconsideration, given that we had very much spoken about data in the 2019 document. So this wasn't really a stretch for us. The time frame, I have to say, was, and in this I am echoing the bit of Susanna Davis's talk that I just heard, we were asked to do this by the 1st of December. We were told about this quite early in the summer, and this really felt like quite a reach. It actually was. And as far as I can sort of piggyback on her exhortations to you about being mindful of the asks that are made, I would love to get on board with that, because this was really quite difficult for the panel.
Before, can I just throw something in here?
Sure.
What I've told people, I know that we have a lot of reports coming back that were generated through what was S124. We have a lot of reports coming back, and I suspect most of them were probably due around January 15. My feeling with reports is that when we get that, it is better, as you and Susanna both said, in everything, to do it right, but rather than to do it quickly. And that if there is need, a progress report is certainly better than trying to rush through a final report.
And we were fine with that. I think what needs to happen, though, again, it's back to communication. That needs to be said, because I do know a lot of people who are preparing reports right now for 124, and I have very little hair, they have less.
I've been telling everybody who's contacted me about a 124 report. That's exactly what I've told them.
Okay.
So, Senator Clarkson, did you?
Yes, but Eitan, forgive me. I'm Allison. Remind me what RDAP stands for. It's Racial Disparity
Advisory Panel. Our actual title, it's quite unwieldy. The Racial Disparities in the Criminal and Juvenile Justice Systems Advisory Panel. We just say Racial Disparities Advisory Panel, or RDAP for short.
Thank you. The acronyms sometimes.
Oh my God. I know. I just joined VSP. I'm losing my mind. I don't know what anyone's talking about. English has evaporated as a possibility. So anyway, when we were doing this report, we really weren't sure initially that it was possible. And we spent some time discussing what could and could not realistically be done. But obviously we got it done. You have it. There was some anger. People were feeling that we were repeating ourselves. And there was some irritation about this. That endless reports are something that tend to annoy people of color who would like to see motion and perhaps a bit less verbiage. Nevertheless, we turned our attentions to producing whatever it was that we could produce in roughly 10 hours of meeting time with the full panel. We meet, for those of you who don't know, on the second Tuesday of every month between 6 and 8 p.m. That's it. That's it. So we had to produce this in with a relatively short time, with relatively little labor and few laborers in some ways. So the lack of time meant that we convened a subcommittee to do a great deal of the heavy lifting. These were people who could meet every week, who could work off times and such. And, you know, that's a lift. There are 5 people on the panel, like myself, who are community members, who just are donating their time and effort to this. We did all of this with the support of the Council of State Governments, and certainly with the tremendous assistance of the Crime Research Group, with whom this would just not have happened. They were statutorily required to help with the data collection that the new report, excuse me, would necessitate. And as I say, this group, the subcommittee, met weekly. Initially, an even smaller group of us met with Kristen McClure, who's head of Agency of Digital Services. And again, her help was initially quite significant to this. We met with a collection of IT officials from various state agencies to get a sense of 3 things. First, what data do exist? Secondly, in what form they exist? And lastly, the possibilities of communication between the various data systems that exist within the criminal and juvenile justice systems. The results of those meetings, and I believe that there were 2 of those meetings, are contained within the 4th appendix of the report that I'm hoping you all have.
No.
It's called The Current State of Data and Data Flows Regarding Racially Relevant Data Among Various State Agencies in Vermont. Senator Clarkson, you look concerned.
We don't have the report. I mean, at least, I mean, you may have emailed it to us, and in that case, I apologize, but I couldn't find it on the judiciary website or on our website under documents.
I will look into that, committee. Thank you.
If you go to the legislative website and go under reports.
Oh, just generally, I went to our committees. I went to judiciary.
I don't think this one was ever directed to come to our committee.
Sorry, you're probably right.
I don't remember, but anyway, it is there.
Okay, okay, great, got it.
So yeah, and then there's that 4th appendix, which is, that's one of my favorites. And the reason it's one of my favorites is because of the flow chart. And that flow chart that's there, once you get to see it, was created by Kristen McClure. And I love it because it reminds me of the work of M.C. Escher, and is in fact rather suitable for framing. It most importantly shows that very tangled web that are the data flows regarding racially relevant data among various state agencies. As the report notes, this is a snapshot of the state of affairs from September and cannot be said to depict matters as they presently stand. Things are necessarily getting better. They are changing not necessarily because of the need for cross-agency communication, but rather because of internal needs. So it won't help to assume that for the purposes of this act, that the data flows are more comprehensible now at the beginning of January, or indeed usable, okay? You're just looking at a picture of what it looked like in September. It's crazy, it's lovely, isn't it? I mean, it's really quite, put it on the wall. I mean, it fascinates me. The subcommittee continued its work from the point of that chart. Like, what do you do now? And it seemed to the subcommittee and then to the full panel, because of course we kept going back to them, that without some sort of standardization, and this, by the way, is an issue that the RDAP addressed in the 2019 report, this effort that was being asked for under 148 would be yet another failed effort concerning the effacement of racial disparity. I'll say that again, that without some sort of standardization, this would be yet another failed effort concerning the effacement of racial disparity. This had been and continues to be a dominant theme for the panel, as the current report makes clear. Without some serious and focused standardization regarding data, the aims of Act 148 with reference to data cannot be achieved. This was perhaps a guiding notion that shaped the panel's efforts throughout the summer and fall as it prepared the present document. Another important moment that concerned the panel had to do with identifying the high impact, high discretion moments in the criminal and juvenile justice systems at which either unconscious or conscious bias can make an entry. This was a task that had occupied our collective imagination in last year's report, but we certainly did not take it then as far as we did here. All of the lawyers on the panel, and there are many, they're great, put their heads together to make an extremely comprehensive list of these moments. And this took no small amount of time, as you can imagine. The community members were able to add other moments that might seem to be outside of the legal framework, moments such as interactions between students and guidance counselors in the school, which, as many of you will know, is very commonplace to say that's the beginning of the school to prison pipeline. It is easy now to give you a resume of these acts, but I must note the enormous amount of time it took to compile these lists. It seemed endless, and people dedicated enormous amounts of time and energy to this compilation. What happened at the same time was a compilation of the data that do presently exist. And with the help of the crime research group, we created a sense of where these data might reside. We also got from crime research group a sense of what data just don't exist. And once the panel had determined that that data would nevertheless be of great importance, we focused on it. Again, we were looking at these high impact, high discretion moments. In the end, we came up with a compilation not merely of the data that are there and but also the locations as a result of working on the creation of this report. We joked about printing out these documents and putting them in a time capsule on Camel's Hump, that if finally we'd have all of this in one place and no one would get to it, which isn't good for transparency, but at least it would all be somewhere. What subsequently became clear were the relatively high number of high impact, high discretion moments in the criminal and juvenile justice systems. We were also mindful of what might be perceived as the relative impossibility of getting to all of these moments in one fell swoop. We then set our minds to prioritizing these moments to the best of our abilities. And what you then have in the report are both a list of prioritized moments, high impact, high discretion moments, and racially relevant data that concern them, and then also a broader list of such moments. We deeply believe that all of these moments are of great concern and need attention and focus. But we show the moments that we believe to have the greatest priority and what data do and do not exist concerning these moments and also their locations. At this point, we had a spread of high impact, high discretion moments and racially relevant data, or lack thereof. And the question became what to do with this, frankly, mess. It seemed clear to many of us that there was no one presently in state government who could, on their own, do the huge lift that would be required here, not only to create the needed data, but even more radically to define it. Like, what data are important? Radically, to define it, then gather it, and certainly then finally to analyze it. From the early meetings with Kristen McClure and the IT officials, it became clear that no one actually has the time to do all of this. And again, look back at that flow chart in the, on page 24. It's a fun one, isn't it?
It's amazing.
Yeah. Get out the Advil.
The whole report, in terms of the amount that's here and the amount that's needed, it's all overwhelming.
And Crime Research Group just did a huge lift on this. I mean, they like picked up the world. It was really quite lovely, the amount of work they did. Also, the Council of State Governments, they came to our rescue at this moment, or at least to mine, because I was certainly a bit overwhelmed and a little bit despairing. And it turns out that a lot of this work is already underway in Connecticut and also in Colorado. And the Council of State Government people facilitated a meeting between 3 officials from the state. This is another long one. The state of Connecticut's Criminal Justice Policy and Planning Division in the Office of Policy and Management. Yeah, it's where it is, right? They know someone in that office who used to work for them. And we were curious, what could we learn from these people since they're already doing this and frankly, they're nearby? They are involved in the implementation of that state's, Connecticut's own efforts regarding the collection and analysis of data concerning the amelioration of racial disparities in both the juvenile and adult criminal justice systems. The panel had a productive meeting with 3 officials from that division who offered useful insight. And we, as I said, we felt that their insight would be, it was gathered from actual experience. We felt it would be invaluable. And so they're there. You have this in one of the appendices to the report. We put this in fact, and the recommendations that we made are in the 3rd section of the report itself. The meeting with these 3 people, and one of them was Mark Pelka, who's the undersecretary in that office, in the Criminal Justice Policy and Planning Division in the Office of Policy and Management, and then 2 of his lead planning analysts. That meeting led to several additional recommendations from the RDAP to you all, the legislature. The RDAP felt that building on their experience would be useful and that there was really no need to reinvent the wheel, especially since the need for movement on the matter of racial disparity is so pressing. And we made the following recommendations. You have them, but I'll go through them quite quickly.
Where are they, Eitan?
They are in the 3rd, I should open that report, which is kind of, they are in, pardon?
On a page?
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. I don't have that open at the moment, but I can do that. It is in the 3rd section of the report proper.
Okay.
Give me a moment and I can probably pull it up for you, but it just takes a moment because I didn't have that particular thing open.
I think it's on page 9, the Roman numeral 3, data collection and analysis, implementation strategies and recommendations.
Correct. That is it. That would be it.
Okay. It's on page 9.
Thank you. You saved me.
No, I just was so curious about where this was.
Well, you found it. I'm glad. This came from the subcommittee's meeting with the Connecticut folks on the 3rd of November. And some of them overlap and reinforce recommendations that the panel has already made. That a body charged with the definition, collection, and analysis of data pertaining to racial disparities across the juvenile and adult criminal justice systems both be created and staffed. Experience has shown that Connecticut has needed 3 staff members charged with data collection and analysis. That this body is housed in an entity that is not subject to the vagaries of the political process, nor in any entity that is politically constituted. In short, the matter of reducing racial disparities must not, under any circumstances, be seen as a partisan issue. That funding be provided for positions within each state agency, Vermont state agency, that needs to extract data concerning racial disparities within its purview that is to be provided to this new body. This extraction is both a time-consuming and possibly lengthy process. that this body produces monthly reports distinctly and deliberately aimed at both the legislature and at broader communities, including historically impacted communities, pertaining to racial disparities in the juvenile and adult criminal justice systems that are concerned with basic demographic information. Transparency must be prime in these reports. That this body's work should be guided by an advisory organ consisting of stakeholders from historically impacted communities, such as communities of color, neurodivergent communities, and communities of gender and sexual minorities, that concerns itself with the definition, collection, and analysis of data pertaining to the amelioration of racial disparities in the juvenile and adult criminal justice systems. Stakeholder input on these matters is crucial. And finally, that the legislature both expect to create this body and further be prepared to consider legislation that supports the work of this body as this body's needs change over time. I would like to note at this point that when we voted on this report, there was one abstention from the judiciary on this section, but otherwise the entire panel approved all of this. I wanted, as I said at the beginning, to conclude by addressing funding. And for those of you who know me, I am by nature and training and probably genetically a college professor. And I do research. It's what I do. It feels like breathing. And I did some research when I wrote this for you. And what I wanted to do was begin with some history. And I wanted to talk about the costs of things in the middle of the 19th century. And a very common job description, particularly in the South, in 1850 was laborer. And it covered a lot of different things, but it was very common. Most people were laborers. They made, in today's dollars, $6 a week or $312 a year. Slaves, and it's as vile as it is to say, we're not talking about people at this moment, are we? We're talking about something that's a species of animate wrench. And depending on which source you're talking to and looking at, they cost between $23,000 and $40,000 a piece. Many plantations had 50 slaves or fewer, but even at 10, which is not usual, but 10, the low figure means that $230,000 was committed to slaves, for the annual income of just under 767 free laborers. 50 slaves would mean $1,150,000. Another important element of all of this were slave ships, which were largely made in Bristol in England. And they cost each of them, in today's money, 62,000 pounds, which comes out roughly, and my math is bad here, depending on the exchange rate, it's around 83,000. Again, the annual salary of 277 laborers, free laborers in the United States. None of this addresses the cost of feeding the slaves, who of course were only nominally people, feeding the slavers' families, maintaining the ships, which was significant. They had to be cleaned and refitted after the transport of slaves to the New World, so that the ships could then transport goods such as cotton or sugar back to Europe. This, of course, is the famous triangle trade. The point that I want to make here is the outlay of capital and the dedication of capital to an economic system in which white supremacy played such a crucial role. And the resonances of that system are sadly not anachronistic today. These are huge sums of money that have gone into the perpetuation of racial discrimination. And one can profitably ask what it cost to support the repressive efforts that went into Reconstruction and into Jim Crow. None of this was free. To undo this is also not going to be free. It's not simply a matter of not buying slaves or slave ships. If it were, there'd be no report There'd be no hearing. We could all go home, have tea. Life would be great. What there does need to be, as this body recognized when it authored Act 148, is a move towards understanding through data the personal impacts of white supremacy and racial disparity upon people in our own systems of justice. But this is going to involve an outlay of capital, just as the Civil Rights Act did in 1964. And that's ongoing, by the way. That didn't stop in 1964. It continues to happen. There are legal articles all over the place, and I spent lots of time reading them, concerning the extent to which employers can legally justify discriminatory practices on the basis of cost containment and profit maximization. That happens all the time, and lawyers know this. Put another way, the question becomes, what financial costs can courts properly impose upon business in the effort to enforce the equal opportunity principle? This is ongoing. It's a commonplace. What I'm saying here is that to say that there's no money may at once be true and also support the very system that this body seeks to dismantle and interrogate. Let me say that again. It's because two things are true at once here. To say that there's no money may at once be true and also support the very the system that this body, this legislature, seeks to dismantle and interrogate. Actualizing these recommendations for me, for the panel, becomes a question of making extremely hard, likely intensely creative, and possibly extraordinarily unprecedented decisions. But I do want to make it very clear that to say there's no money is in fact an ideological statement when we are discussing dismantling systems of oppression. There's no money means that the money is being used elsewhere and that choices are made about the dispersal of capital, just as they always have been. Just as they always have been. If saying no, there's no money seems reasonable, I am begging all of us to consider why that's so. Why does that seem reasonable? Finally, the reasonableness of saying that there's no money is exactly the thinking that exemplifies systemic disparities. It's located in the reasonable itself. This is, in fact, the essence of systemic racism, is when we just take refuge in what is reasonable. The system is already in place. It seems reasonable because it's familiar. Not because we're necessarily putting on our KKK hoods, but because we live in a system that is already telling us that racism is okay. I'm also asserting here, passionately, that none of this is going to come for free. Slave ships cost something. Slaves cost something, both financially and in terms of incalculable horror. And it all costs the ruling establishment money in the first place. Getting out of this is going to cost money too. And that's all I have to offer you. So
That's all?
I'm afraid so, Jeanette.
Senator Clarkson?
You put it in such a great way, Etan, because no one has really said, I mean, I haven't heard, and you know, we've been talking about this for a long time in many ways. No one has put it in terms of the cost of the system, the cost of building this system, and thinking about it, the cost of dismantling it is going to be equally expensive.
Yes.
And it's the first time it's the first time we've actually, I've actually heard it stated that way. So thank you for that.
Welcome. I thought it would be helpful. I thought it would be, I mean, when you actually, it's very frightening in some ways when you do the research on this, when you realize the amount of capital that was involved in this was just extraordinary, huge. And then when you stop to go, what, we're going to do this for free? These systems are so entangled and so complex and have filtered through technology into even forms that could not have been imagined in 1850. There's just, it is naive at best to believe that we're going to get out of this without expenditures.
Senator Rahm?
I'm so struck by, I've just been turning over in my mind that, as I understand it, kids of color make up about 2.5% of the population, but 25% of the youthful offenders who are going into our court system. It's not a problem I think money can fix and, probably can help, but, even our Defender General's office was saying that in Chittenden County, where they've really tried to take a concerted look at this, and they've had the numbers and they've tried to watch this trend, they haven't really moved the dial. And so I'm really soul searching on this one, because it just feels so urgent to make sure our kids are not, that's a huge disparity.
Yes.
And, I just wondered if you could comment on, as we prioritize, how we really work to support kids. I have legislation to try and limit the use of suspension and expulsion in schools as a behavioral tool, because we know about how much that affects kids of color and kids with disabilities. But what is it going to take? Are other states seeing that big of a disparity? What is happening here? I
have not had the time, I'm afraid, Senator, to investigate exactly what's going on around this in other states to the point of having percentage points for you. I can say broadly from my reading, yes, that there are similar and even greater disparities in certain places. That doesn't answer your question entirely, but also saying, what do we do to fix it? I need my panel. For that. I'm not smart enough to do that on my own.
If we were to invest in one thing to try and turn something like that around, what would it be? Your perspective.
One thing.
One thing. I think that's what we were working against, was the one thing.
Yeah.
I think the panel was trying very hard not to do one thing, precisely because the one thing wasn't the thing. I'm actually going to punt on that one too, because we've already narrowed it down from perhaps 20 different things that the juvenile justice system should look at to 5 that we prioritized. Without the help of Jessica Brown and Rebecca Turner and Sheila Linton, just to name a few people, I'm not going to even hazard on this one to go anywhere. If you're asking me to take the 5 that we were able to come up with and go to 1, I'm not that smart.
So, Ethan, maybe I misunderstood, but the 5 recommendations that you gave us all revolved around the creation and funding of a body to, am I looking at something different?
That's section 3, yes. But we made point in section 2, I believe it is, made reference to there's a table that provides you with a prioritized list of the high impact, high discretion moments as we identified them.
And I guess my question would be, following up on Senator Rahm's question, was that if we were looking at that prioritized list, and I don't have it in front of me right now, so I can't remember it, but would if we were to pick one thing, would it be number one on your prioritized list?
That's what I'm saying. I want to talk to the panel. I don't believe we put them in rank order.
Oh, okay.
I think what we did is said these 5
Okay, I see.
are at the top.
So I see 6 here.
Okay.
The ones you just
I'm
read.
sorry. I'm doing this from memory
Yeah.
because I do not have that particular document sitting in front of me at the moment. And I was so happy you found it, I just let it go. But I will find it. Give me a moment. The computer is slow.
So while you're looking, Madam Chair, may I just add something to this as we begin to weigh the cost that this reconciliation will cost us? Is David Cahill said a couple of years ago, and it really struck home with me when, as Keisha's talking about things that are really, just striking us as we go through all this trauma, the cost of trauma to our, and we were talking about the criminal justice system, but I mean, and when you think about the cost of trauma to a culture, I mean, this is what we're talking about, is the cost of trauma, and how we rectify that and heal that going forward, and anyway, it's
I want
to huge.
Go on. I think I only heard the end of Susanna Davis's presentation, but it really is back to the issue of equity. If you're going to do it, you need to do it. It's not that there's just going to be one issue here, because first of all, they're interrelated. And it took a lot for the people on the panel to disaggregate them to as much as they did to even get to the lists on page 4 and on page 6, the prioritized lists. It took a lot of effort at disaggregation to get those down. It really, my sense is we really need to go to the needs part that she mentioned and not really focus so much on can we afford this or that. It's really a broader concern. I'm not trying to say I don't understand money's involved. I do. But I do also think it's important to bear in mind that there are limits to disaggregation.
So this is, I'm trying to distill all this in my head, and I at some point need to hear more about the creation and funding of the body that you've suggested here, and what that, how the details of how that would work, and in contrast to putting, and that's going to cost something. I understand that. So that need prioritized with putting money into for example, the education system to get rid of this disparity that Senator Rahm was talking about with the number of kids who are kids of color who end up in the criminal justice system. So and I do hate to say this, but we are going to have to make decisions about where to put money and where not to put money. It isn't as if we can put money in every place. So I at some point would like to hear more about this body that is the potential for creating this body and what it would actually do. And can it be, is it something that is limited time until we collect that? I don't know. Anyway, I'd like to hear at some point more about that creation. And is this something that I believe we're getting some money from the Council of State Government to the Brennan Center to work on the justice reinvestment? And is this something that we can, I don't know.
Senator, are you aware of Appendix 2 and 3 in the report?
No, I did not read the whole report. I just read the.
You may find that useful to the point that you're making.
Okay.
Appendix 2 are the statutes used in Connecticut concerning the collection of relevant data. And the third appendix are the statutes that were used in Connecticut to create this particular, the Criminal Justice Policy and Planning Division.
Okay.
So that will perhaps start you on that.
Okay.
And there are other things to be done after that, should you need them.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And may I just add, Madam Chair, that as this is described, it makes me think that actually that we have a body that could have a committee, I mean, a sort of a sub-body formed out of it, which is your Government Accountability Committee. I mean, this is asking for accountability because it's a body charged with the definition, collection, and analysis of data pertaining to racial disparities. So you could, in a way, have a government accountability subgroup that could focus exactly on this stuff. I mean, I think you have the umbrella for it. We don't need to necessarily create a new umbrella. It's accountability.
That's a volunteer legislative committee. I think that what this report is talking about is more of a professional body that works on it. And I would think that where it, if anything, just off the top of my head here, it belongs with the research group.
Yes. Yeah.
That is what they do, is collect data and I think and do research. Yeah, and they're very helpful in that.
Which group are you?
Karen Gannett's, what is it called, Eitan?
Crime Research Group.
Crime Research
Group. Oh, the
Group.
Crime Research Group, right. Yeah, they're great.
The point that the panel was making was not certainly to disparage their work, but simply this is a particular kind of expertise, the reconciliation of different data systems.
Mm-hmm.
There was a sense on the part of the panel that this was a huge task and one that may be bigger than they are staffed to handle. There was also a sense on the part of the panel that there's enough work on all of this that there's a lot of collaboration that should be happening.
And I know that in the criminal justice system, I'm thinking just right now in my head about data collection in the law enforcement in that end of it. And I do know that I'm pretty sure that all the law enforcement agencies are going to be moving to Valcor. So they're all going to be using the same system. So that will make it.
That will help.
That'll help as long as the individual, what?
There's an example here of some of the issues that were crazy. I don't remember who it was. There was some agency within the criminal justice system using a system that is so antiquated that it conflates race and ethnicity. I mean, currently we have a system that's doing this. I'm not kidding. In the state of Vermont in 2020, I mean, maybe they changed it in the last 6 weeks. There's a system that is still conflating race and ethnicity. I mean, somebody's got to go through this. And I mean, when someone told me that, I got a headache. I mean, I wanted to like throw things.
We're glad we weren't around.
Yeah, no, it would have been a bad thing, but yeah, right. But I mean, it's that level of, it's reconciling not merely different systems, there are different conceptualizations behind them that are simply, I mean, they're like 100 years old. I mean, nobody does that anymore.
Well, I think it also collecting data becomes, for example, I work for a housing authority.
Right.
On special projects, and on our application, it says race information and ethnicity information. That's voluntary. because you can, and there's a reason for some of that, because you don't want people to be discriminating against people when they read the application and they say, oh, this is a person of color, so we're not gonna look at their application. So it's,
right. But this is a little bit different. This is sort of saying, you see what I mean? Okay.
yeah, I do. I'm just saying that I think that there are in the collection of data, there are so many variables, and why you do it and why you don't do it and how you do it. And I'm just thinking of law enforcement, for example, when they collect data at a roadside stop, is it self-identified data, or is it
No, I mean,
data identified by the cop that stops the person? It's a huge difference there.
Right. And the issue in that particular instance is to identify whether there is profiling going on. So what's most important at that moment is the perception of the person with the power in the situation, which would be the law enforcement officer.
Right. So I think that the collection of the data and the coordination of it within the criminal justice system after the arrest happens, when you get to the level of the courts and stuff, is more in the jurisdiction of judiciary. Ours is kind of pre the actual entrance into the justice system.
Okay.
It's how you get there. That I think that if I'm looking at this right, because I do know that judiciary is also looking at this through the justice reinvestment. And so I don't want to, not that I don't want to do it, but that we all have enough to do anyway, that we don't want to be duplicating. Does that make any sense, committee?
Yes. But that we might create the body, but the judiciary might direct it.
Well, I don't know that we'll even create the body.
No, but I mean that those are your dividing up of the.
No. My dividing line was if we're talking about the criminal justice system, there's you enter it through some action that involves law enforcement. So then you enter into the court system and the defender general and the attorney generals and the state's attorneys and the Department of Corrections. And so it's a kind of a continuum. And I'm saying that our particular purview here, I believe, is where it starts with law enforcement. And when it gets to the actual entering into the criminal justice system, that means going to the courts or to juvenile court or adult court or diversion or whatever it is, or to corrections, that is more in the purview of judiciary.
Right.
That's what I thought I was saying.
Yeah. That the portal is okay.
That we address law enforcement, they address the judiciary. And I didn't mean to be saying we don't want to do that, but I am aware that they are going to be doing that also. So.
Oh my gosh, there's some strange video.
It's the adjutant general.
Oh, that's it. Oh.
Yeah.
It looked like we were being Zoom bombed by some.
Nobody wants to Zoom bomb us. So, Eitan, I think that I am going to spend a little more time with this report on reading the appendixes.
Okay.
And committee, I think that we'll set up another day to come back to this, to address both Susanna's report and this, and maybe look at also look at the list of things that the different committees and stuff. And both Brian and I are on the Sunset committee, and I'm not sure if we want to push it off to them to look at all of those and how they collaborate, and or if we want to do it ourselves. But anyway, okay.
I mean, the more someone could help us figure out how all of these reports intersect, the better. I don't know if that's something we could get Ledge Council to help us with at some point.
Well, you know, we, I think that Susanna talked about how we have all these committees and task forces and stuff have just grown. And unfortunately, what happens is that we have 11 committees in the Senate and I think 14 in the House. And we each take our little piece of it and we ask for a report. And so there isn't any kind of centralized reporting system. So what Eitan was talking about before was that this report that he was just talking about that came out of what was it? Act 148 was kind of on top of and in addition to and almost not in contradiction, but in other reports that had been requested before that we don't. So I think we need to look at how we request reports and how we assign them. And that's just, I don't know how we do that.
Right, because duplication of effort seems, and they're done in silos. And you're right. Duplication of effort is a waste of all our time, particularly volunteer time, which
It is
our time after we end session anyway. To that point, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I realize that Keisha and I both, as serving in different aspects of leadership on the Social Equity Caucus panel, have been asked to meet with the speaker and the president pro tem with Susanna to discuss the recommendations and and I'm not fully clear on what the purpose of the meeting is, but it was sort of arbitrarily put at 3:45 today, which had been moved, and I hadn't appreciated that it had been set for so early a time. So maybe just one of us, I'm happy to stay here if Keisha wants to go off, but I just wanted to let you know that in another silo, there is a request of our presence at 3:45. One of us, I'm happy to stay here if you want.
Okay. I think we're going to have to start putting our foot down. I knew you'd say that, and I apologize. I'm just going to say the chair's meetings right now are scheduled for 4:00 on Tuesdays. And other than those days, I think that we should not think that we can schedule anything before 4:30.
Right. Right.
And farther on in the session, it'll probably be more like 5.
I would agree with you. And normally this got changed from another time that was super inconvenient, like the inauguration. And I hadn't appreciated it had been rescheduled for today at that hour.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to say that we will reschedule the conversation here and continue working on this. And there are some things that Susanna had in her, I think it was in her implicit bias training about questions that we ask when we're looking at pieces of legislation. And if we can put those kind of in front of us so we're thinking about them. And then this morning in Judiciary, Matt Valerio, the Defender General, had 4 questions that he always looks at when there's new legislation and how we would. So I'm going to add those to the list because I think they are also important.
Yes. And yes,
okay.
That is useful. Did we get sent their presentation? Because it was so good. It was, I'd like to ask, I'm going to ask her for those questions, the lens.
Okay. All right. So with that, thank you, Eitan, so much for joining us. And
Thank you.
You'll be back, and we hate to be so kind of muddy here, or wishy-washy, or what is the word I'm trying to kind of unclear. But
there's always an unclear stage. You should have been there while we were writing this thing.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks a lot.
Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eitan. Enjoy the banana belt.
Yeah, right. So I see we've been joined by the Adjutant General. And if you would like to join us here, I scheduled you because we had heard some rumblings about fear of people being deployed and their safety in terms of COVID. There's not a lot we can do about their safety in general, but so I thought that we would hear from you about whether there was anything we needed to do or if everything was set, and hear what you had to say to us. So welcome.
How are you, ma'am?
Good. And we have a new committee member, Senator Rahm is with us. So
Wonderful
the rest of us are old stuff.
Welcome, Senator Rahm. Wonderful to meet you at some point. Hopefully we'll do that in person.
All right, so take it away. Do you want to just tell us if there's anything we need to be worried about or concerned or do?
No, ma'am. Actually, and I did send an email out to you. I can send it again. I know you're probably buried in email with the session ongoing. Whether it's Army or Air National Guard, when it comes to our training events, we were ahead of this very early on, implementing mitigation strategies. So, for instance, we've got our Air National Guard members in the ballpark of about 200 that are going to Tyndall Air Force Base. So our challenge is not just protecting them on the way there, it's ensuring that they stay protected while they're there. Mm-hmm. So we consolidated them, we put them on military air. So that functions in essence as a green bubble. So they go as a group to Tyndall, they are staying at a separate facility as Vermonters, as a unit. So they're not intermingling with other folks at Tyndall. So they will operate separately as a unit. And then upon returning, we've got a pretty robust testing plan in place. They'll quarantine upon return to the state. And similarly, that's also true, although we don't know when they'll be coming back. Just received some very specific guidance from DOD via National Guard Bureau. And we've got a plan in place for our soldiers that are returning from inauguration support once we get them back in state. Again, we sent them down in coach buses. That was by design. Whether it was by military air or otherwise, they were going to go as a group. They worked as a group in DC and continue to do that. Mitigation strategies are there. That being said, we've had challenges. We've been very fortunate as an organization to have a very small number, comparatively speaking, of COVID positive cases. Fortunately, the vast majority of them have been very minor symptoms, and they were over it in a very short period of time. We've only had one incident that I know of where soldiers, or airmen in this case, went to a training event where the gaining state that was hosting the training probably didn't have the necessary protocols in place. We've since communicated with them via National Guard Bureau, the Air National Guard Readiness Center, to get that rectified. So, but in any case, we've been very careful with this, very diligent. I've called and spoken with every single member of our organization that has tested positive to check on them, to check on their families. But what that tells me, ma'am, is that our mitigation strategy has been very successful thus far.
So do we need to be concerned about making sure that they get vaccinated before they go? Is that a priority?
Well, for us, ma'am, we're, and again, it's important to understand our supply of vaccine. Thus far, we've been receiving the Moderna vaccine that comes through DOD. Not through anything that comes into the state of Vermont through the Department of Health, separate formulary. So we received that, and we, like the state, have worked through a triage of prioritization, and the top tier of those priorities are those soldiers and airmen that are preparing to mobilize. The challenge with Moderna is it's 2 vaccines. So it's about 28 days apart. I got my first dose. My next dose will be 1 February. So depending on when we get the second dose and when those soldiers or airmen are deploying, it wouldn't be any point for us to give them a first vaccine knowing that they're going to be going to their mobilization site without a second vaccine. So we're working very diligently with that. Our medical planners have all of that in place. And as we see increased supplies of the vaccine coming in, we'll be able to get our members vaccinated.
But you said you get yours directly through DOD, right?
That's correct, ma'am.
Okay. Senator Rahm and then Senator Calmer.
I was just wondering if that means you're counted in the overall Vermont count, or that remains separate.
We're counted in the overall Department of Health numbers, ma'am. We report that through the channels. We're very closely tied in with our partnered agencies in the state.
Okay.
Are you talking about the number of vaccines or the number of cases?
Both, ma'am. We report the number of cases that we have, folks that come back tested positive. I communicate that at my level immediately with the governor, and several times a week we meet with Commissioner Smith, Secretary Smith. So our Director of Military Support, Colonel Randy Gates, is integrated with the state EOC, and our medical planners are now integrated within the Department of Health, helping on vaccine planning. So there's a very consistent communication flow. So we make sure we report the number of positives should we have them. On the vaccine side, again, any doses that we provide through DOD is one less that we have to provide out of the state supply.
Thank you. Senator Calmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. General, how many of our Guards people went to Washington? And I'm assuming you said they were on a coach together. Is that a bus which seats, I don't know, 45 or 50 people? I assume they were tested before they got on the bus and will be tested again when they get off.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Great question. I just had a note from my director of the Joint Staff, Brigadier General Manfredi. There were actually four coach buses, so approximately 25 soldiers per bus. That allowed for more social distancing, masks all the way down. And similarly, the benefit for us in doing it this way is they retained positive control over their own transportation while they were in DC. We were not dependent on the DC National Guard or any other entity to get around in support of their mission.
And I think I remember reading or hearing somewhere that they were going to be there for a few days, but we're coming back soon.
Yes, sir. So we're waiting to hear back from National Guard Bureau. We're there as long as the mission is required, as long as our support is needed. Once that mission has ended, we're bringing our soldiers home. So there were about 102 that went down, 100 soldiers from our cavalry squadron, several from our brigade support battalion and our field artillery battalion, and then 2 public affairs representatives from the public affairs detachment.
Thank you, General. I'm sure they represented us well.
They did, sir.
Are there any other questions or concerns or anything? I thought we just needed to have an update here about whether there was something we needed to do about it or not. Senator Rahm?
I suppose while we have the Adjutant General, I hate to ask this, but it was reported in the press that there was lots of vetting within the military and the National Guard to make sure that people within those ranks were clear on the transition of power and the fact that we have a new vice president and president, and any electoral irregularities did not change the outcome of the election. Is that of any ongoing concern to you in the National Guard? Is there any reason to keep vetting folks about the safety of our country and the sort of clarity around the election?
I'll give you my perspective on that, ma'am. And I've got Major Kurt Kaplan here, who's our Judge Advocate General. Our message has been very consistent and is always very consistent as an organization, as a member of the Guard, either Air or Army. irrespective of service. And I mentioned, didn't make the interview, but I got a quick interview with WCAX on Sunday when I was there to see our soldiers off. I just reminded our soldiers, politics aside, doesn't matter how you lean. You swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of Vermont against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I think that says it all. There was much consternation. I think, unfortunately, a lot of it is misinformation as to what folks were finding. For me, I don't know the numbers. I think there are a very, very small number of folks that may have been pulled off the mission. I don't know why. They were not Vermont soldiers. But out of the nearly 26,000 that were there, I think we're doing quite well. But I'll defer to Major Kaplan. He's off camera, but you should be able to hear him. There are some limitations on what we can and can't do when it comes to vetting personnel, ma'am.
Absolutely. So for that specific mission, again, you saw it in the news, the FBI was, my too far?
Yeah, just slide over.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, the FBI was the primary agency to do that vetting, and that was by design. So that was specific to that mission. But as far as every day goes, for the Vermont National Guard, Governor Scott remains the commander-in-chief when they are here, and if they are activated to federal service, then their commander-in-chief is President Biden. So there's no ongoing concerns that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So I know that you are concerned about this, and I don't know if we're going to do it again this year, but there's another election of the Adjutant General again this year. And I hate to keep bringing this up, but I continue to push for us to change the way we do it and to actually have it appointed instead of elected. And so I don't know that that'll get introduced this year, but we'll see.
Thank you, ma'am. I know there's probably some interest in some of the contacts I have on the House side, but that's legislative.
Yeah.
It is an election year, as you noted. So I will align myself with Calvin Coolidge and give you a quote from him that nothing I've never said ever did me any harm.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great quote.
All right. Okay. Anything else, committee members? And I thank you so much for taking the time to join us to do this. And we just did get, excuse me, a couple reports from you. I
Yes,
think
ma'am.
the sexual harassment report, that isn't what it's called, but we got that. And I believe there actually is some kind of general bill being introduced in the House, and I have not seen it yet, but so we'll see where that goes.
Yes, ma'am, and I'm looking forward. I don't know yet if the approach will be to brief a joint session of the committees, or if we'll do it separately. It's up to you. We're ready to do either.
Yeah.
So yeah, the sexual harassment, sexual assault report, which is required by law, and then of course we add into that the gender report, which we will do as with all of our information. We share that willingly. And if you have a moment, I can give you a quick update on what's coming if you're interested.
Sure. And that I also would, I know that we had talked in the spring about doing some burn pit registry days around the state, and you had the mobile unit, and then of course all that kind of fell apart with given COVID and everything, but if you can just kind of update us on where that is.
Yes, ma'am. So that continues to be a priority for us as an organization, certainly for me in this role. I interviewed with Darren Perrin for You Can Quote Me this past Sunday, and that was one of the topics of conversation. So our plan is moving ahead. COVID, we'll deal with it. Right now, we're targeting March as the launch date, and we'll communicate that. We'll communicate that with the caucus and the two committees. I think we'll probably end up sending it to the entire legislature because I think it's important. The plan remains as we briefed. We will try to have an event over the course of several months in every one of the Vermont counties. So 14 events, we'll stage them out of American Legions and VFWs. Mr. Gregg, our Deputy Adjutant General, who's sitting here with me, he worked to get some state laptops, which will help us bypass the DoD firewalls that sometimes ends up kicking members off, and they really never, they give up, so they don't register. Mm-hmm. So we're going to engage in a kind of a media campaign to make sure we get the word out. So we more than doubled the number that we had, a year and a half ago when we first passed the law. In my view, as I said on You Can Quote Me, it's not enough. We've had thousands of members deployed. We've got to get them to register. And I think part of that conversation, which is also relevant, is to make sure that those soldiers and airmen, once we get them in there to register, these veterans, we inform them on the importance of signing a release of medical information to the VA. Because who knows what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years. You may have some aberrant condition that you weren't anticipating. If you're not thinking about it, you may not tie it back to burn pit exposure. So it's important for the VA to have that information, let them make that determination. So we're looking at March to get that done. Yes, ma'am.
That's great. I think that you should, as much as possible, use the legislators to help you promote it in the counties. And because I know that the Windham County caucus, or delegation, not caucus, Windham County delegation has said that whenever you're ready, we will help you do publicity and get people out and do whatever we can. And I'm sure the other county delegations feel pretty much the same. So make sure you use us.
Will do, ma'am. Very much appreciated.
Did you want to hear what else is coming up, Senator Clarkson? I think you said yes.
No, no, I was offering to help, and I think we had offered this 2 years ago with the burn pits, and we stand ready to support that effort in whatever way we want, and maybe even by the end of March we could do it in person.
Well, yeah, you can't have. I think that the traveling registry would be in person, taking appropriate precautions and stuff. And you could get your legislators out there to act as traffic control people.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And welcoming people.
And serving cookies and tea.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you posted, ma'am. And so the other thing I've got, you should see it at the beginning of February. So back in August, and Senator Rahm, I can certainly send it to you if you have an opportunity. I sent a legislative update on what the Guard's doing. Since then, a lot of things have happened. We now have a legislative caucus, which I asked for this past summer. That happened very quickly. I have 3 co-chairs, and I would, again, this is a legislative function, but I think a caucus on the House side can certainly include senators, can it not?
It can. And I am a member of that caucus. The problem is that because we have 2 committees, it's almost impossible for us to attend caucus meetings. I can't do it because I have meetings starting at 8 o'clock every morning until 5 every afternoon. And so I can't. And the other problem is we only have 5 members on our committees. So we can't duck out of a committee to go to a specialized caucus where House members have 11. So it's easier for 1 or 2 of them to sneak out. So while I am a member of that caucus, but I have never attended. I read the notes and the reports and stuff.
Well, good. Thank you, ma'am. That certainly gives some continuity on the effort, because to me, it's very important to keep up that level of communication with our legislature.
Well, it might be whatever you send to the National Guard caucus. You might want to send to each of, just put the 5 of us on your list. I get it because I'm on there, but just put us on because we are the relevant committee. here. Does that make sense, committee members?
Yes.
Okay.
So the second version of that will be coming out for the past 6 months. I'm going to send that out in February. I would like to make it shorter because I know you're all very busy. I can't get it less than 5 pages. This is an incredibly busy organization. You should be proud of our soldiers and airmen and the work they're doing. And we're making significant progress in a lot of different areas. And all of that, despite a very busy operational schedule, despite COVID, despite short notice support requests like the inauguration. Our soldiers and airmen are stepping up and they're doing what's asked of them. So I couldn't be more proud and honored to be in this position working for them. And the other thing I would tell you before we, pending other questions, something else I think it's important for the committee to know. I found out late last week that the Vermont Army National Guard is the first Guard state to open a combat arms battalion-sized unit to the recruitment of women. So it's a very rigorous and structured process. Historically, until about 4.5 years ago, women could not serve in combat arms. That's infantry, that's cavalry, that's field artillery. In fact, they were even prohibited from being in the unit. So the Army and the National Guard Bureau gave us a structure to work within. It's called the Leaders First program. And you will put 2 women at the time in the rank of E5 or above in the unit before you could, quote unquote, open it to recruitment. And only that was through a request to the National Guard Bureau from me requesting permission to do so. So our CAV squadron has done that. And again, for me, I'm proud of that organization. There can only be one first, and that's the Vermont Army National Guard. By the end of the month, and speaking with the brigade commander, our infantry battalion may meet all the requirements. That request will be going forward. Timing works out. We may not only be the first, we may also be the second. So Vermont, in my view, is leading the way. So for a small state, I think that's saying something.
Sometimes there's nothing wrong with being small.
I'm good with it, ma'am.
Any other comments, questions, concerns? Senator Clarkson?
So, General, I just would like to ask, so it's a combat unit. It's not an all women combat unit. It's women in combat. I mean, joining a unit, right? Or is
Yes,
it
ma'am.
an all women combat unit?
No, that would be great, but no, ma'am. It's a
Like Spider Woman and Wonder Woman and other like Queen of the Night and Gwenda all being together in one unit.
Well, what this does for us is it allows opportunities for women. So you would have, in fact, combat arms makes up about 2/3 of our Army National Guard. So by opening those battalions, certainly one battalion-sized unit now, and then hopefully another one here in the near term, we have just more than doubled the opportunities for advancement and career to women in the organization.
It's great.
Remind me here, it's called combat units, right?
Combat arms, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And those are very specific military occupational specialties. If you're enlisted, or a branch, if you're an officer that focuses on those combat arms specifics. So being infantry or field artillery or cavalry or armor.
And there are how many people in each unit?
So the CAV squadron has probably a little over 500.
A little less than that.
Yeah. So in the ballpark of about 500, probably a little bit more for the infantry. Infantry structure is a little bit different. But in doing this, we'll be in the ballpark of 1,000 positions that will now be available to women, and we're going to work to make them competitive.
Good. Good. Anything else here? Again, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. We know how busy you are, and the one thing about being able to do this on Zoom instead of having to come to the State House when we ask you to come to speak to us is that you don't have to actually drive and come here and sit and wait and then So there are some advantages, very few, but that's one.
Yeah.
Well, in person or on Zoom, it's always good to see all of you.
Well, vice
thank you.
versa. Back
Yes.
at you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, take care, man.
Yeah.
Thanks. So committee, what do we want to, we don't have anything else scheduled today, I don't think. I think that was it. Is there anything, is there anything we need to talk about now? I thought that next week, Gail, do you want to join us? So far next week, we've talked about, I have so many notes here that I can't even remember what we've talked about, but I believe, Gail, we talked about having on Tuesday, all things law enforcement.
Actually, on Tuesday, we're looking at continued discussion of public records of juveniles. And that is after.
Oh, right, because we have the
governor's address.
That's right. We have the
Oh,
governor's
right.
address.
And so we'll be starting late.
Well, I figure that doesn't usually last more than an hour, does it?
No. I mean, so we'll start at like 2:15 or so.
That's what I had thought. Yeah.
So the governor's thing, the governor's thing is Tuesday?
Tuesday at 1.
So, yeah, so that we'll do that on Tuesday. And then Wednesday, did we say we would do DPS, the executive order?
Yeah, we're going to start with the governor's executive order.
Yep.
And then we're going to talk after that about the Criminal Justice Council and discuss law enforcement reports regarding like S-124.
In 124. And we'll get a list of them and see which ones we hear from first. But the council is, do you know who Bill Sorrell is, the non-law enforcement chair of that council? The governor appointed him.
As well as William Sheets.
Yeah, and he's the acting executive director.
We also had Christopher Brickell, James Baker is invited, haven't heard back. Ingrid Jonas, Michael Sherling, and David Scher is invited.
Yeah, and we'll David, yeah. And then we'll get a list of those reports. When there's replacing the overnight, the residential at the council, the level 2 to level 3, where they are with that. How the expanded council is working out because we changed the membership. We also changed some of the responsibilities of the council advisory board so that they had more oversight on disciplinary matters and hear about that. So I'll make a list of the reports that we'll be expected to hear on. And then on Thursday,
Thursday at 1:30, we'll be talking about.
Sorry, may I just ask a question about the reports?
Yeah.
Gail, I assume they're all on that reports page. I found Eitan's thing, but is it possible for you to post them on our website, maybe on Monday, so we can take a peek at them before the week? I mean,
some of them aren't done. The reports,
oh, okay.
They're just progress reports because. And particularly ones I think that came from the council, because they were operating without a director. It took them a long time to get the appointments.
No, I remember we asked for more updates, right? But the ones that
if there are written reports, then we'll ask them to submit them to Gail before.
And as for the reports, there are hundreds of them out there. And I'm supposed to get a copy of all the ones due to Senate Government Operations, but it doesn't always happen. If I get them, I do put them in our reports file.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thanks.
I know the other ones that we may not be addressed to us or I might not have, I can track them down and post them. I'd be happy to do that.
Good, thank you. And then on Thursday, I thought we would start looking at the elections list, because that is something that we, if we're going to do anything, we have to do it before crossover. Because anything with elections has got to be done this year. It can't be done next year. So we'll start looking at that, and we'll just invite all the people. And I've asked people to submit their wish lists. And if they don't get on the wish list. So I have the Secretary of State's, and I'm going to, before that, I'm going to take the ones that I have and kind of put them into categories, and I'll send them to everybody. And so they'll be in categories of, just kind of administrative things, or things that town clerks need to do, or things that are overreaching, or that are really changes in kind of the philosophy of our elections, like mail out, things like, put them in different categories. Right. And I will make sure that you know who it is that has suggested that change. Right. If it's the Secretary of State and the town clerks, or if it's just Secretary of State, or if it's VPIRG, or whoever it is.
And we're going to start all things election on Thursday or Friday. Sorry.
Thursday.
And we can make suggestions as we go through it, because there's some ongoing ones from the past I'd like to revisit. But I thought we could revisit them in the course of our discussion.
We should. Okay. Obviously, other things will come up. But if you have things that right now that you know that we would like to come up, let's get them on the list.
Okay. May I email them to you?
Huh?
Should I email them to you, or should I wait till Thursday?
No, you should email them to me, because the more things that we can get on the list at the beginning of the conversation, the better.
Great. So, I will email them to you tonight.
Okay. So if anybody else has, like Senator Polina, if you think we should just stop having elections, period, put that on the list and let's get it out there right away.
Well, they are kind of annoying.
Huh?
They are kind of annoying.
I know.
I think Jeanette wants everyone appointed. No more.
By me. No, but let's get as much out there as we can to start with, because I think that's going to, that's my hope. And I will work on that this weekend and get that list out, and I'll get it to Gail also, so she can put it on the committee page.
So Madam Chair, we have an hour to speak about that. And then we have Beth Pierce coming in at 2:30.
Let's change that. Have you already confirmed with Beth?
I have, yeah.
Let's see if she could come on Friday instead, and then we'll have VSEA come in on Friday also, because we have two. There's the report from her on the law enforcement on who belongs in Group C, but then there's also the new proposal that she's making about changing the retirement system and some of the changes that she's proposing. And I think that's going to take a fair amount of time. So let's do elections.
Madam Chair, may I go to this meeting that we had chatted about? May I go to that now?
No.
While you're okay.
Are you asking for a hall pass?
I am.
Yes.
I waited. Look, I waited.
You may go, and in fact, I think we can all go, and Gail and I will work on this schedule for next week, because it's still only Wednesday.
Good. It looks good.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to
See you soon. See you soon.